Good evening, everybody. My name is Bert Dicht. I am the Managing Director of Membership for the National Space Society. And on behalf of my colleague Larry Ahern, Vice President of Chapters, I'd like to welcome you to our Space Forum this evening. And yes, space needs lawyers. So I know it's going to be a really interesting topic for you. Let me go back here. Yep, just needed to make sure I had that adjusted. So as always, I'd like to go through the agenda. We'll have some virtual etiquette, a few NS announcements. Then I'll talk about what's coming up next, and then we'll get right into our program, which I know you're going to enjoy. As always, feel free to submit a question using the Q&A function. It goes directly to our speaker, and it's easier to pick out the questions as we go along. But you are free to use the chat function as well. We just ask that you be respectful of our panelists and all of the audience because everyone can see that. So thank you in advance. We know we'll be getting a lot of questions. We had a lot of questions submitted. And I know our presenter is going to be trying to address a lot of those in the session. As always, we encourage you to give to our cause. If you're enjoying programming like the Space Forums and Town Halls, encourage you to donate to support NSS. I just want to thank all of the members who've given recently on our year-end appeal and those who have given to us during these Space Forums and Town Halls. So thank you in advance. I will also put this link into the chat so you can use it. But we really do appreciate your support. As always, complete the Space Forum survey. It goes right to it once we end the session, and it's easy to fill out. Takes just a few minutes. The survey is anonymous, and it really does help us in terms of planning and improving the quality of these events. So again, thank you in advance for that as well. So now a few NSS announcements that are a few things coming up. I'm going to be doing this probably every Space Forum, just giving you a primer on the ISDC 2025. That will be coming up in June 19th to 22nd at the Rosen Center in Orlando. We want you to come here to visit us on the Space Coast. We've got a really great program, 18 exciting sessions. Everything from living in space to space history. We're doing a new session for college students called Rising Stars. And we really encourage you to come out and join us. These are just a few of the speakers that we have. James Green, a senior advisor from NASA. Nicola Fox, who's the Associate Administrator for Science Mission Directorate. And I actually had a chance to interview her a few weeks ago, actually before the Blue Ghost mission. And she has a lot of great information to share. And of course, Dr. Pascal Lee, a frequent contributor to NSS, the co-founder and chairman of the Mars Institute. Those are just three of the great speakers that we have, and we'll be showcasing more of them as we go along. The early bird deadline is April 15th, so please register today. The hotel is filling up as well, but they are working to get an additional hotel so that we can accommodate everybody. We've got a couple of great tours of the Kennedy Space Center and also some Space Coast space museums that you'll be able to enjoy either before the ISDC starts or after. So we look forward to that. Also, I really encourage you to explore the NSS blog. We've got a lot of great information that's shared there, press releases, all of the announcements for the Space Forums and Town Halls can be found there. So if you ever miss an email announcement, just check out the blog. We've got space news, we've got book reviews, we have access to the Space Settlement Journal. It is a great way to stay up to date with all this information, keeps you covered. And you can also subscribe to the blog. So what you get once you do that is you'll get an email when there's a new post. So I encourage you to go out there, check them out. They're really great. And you are also free. We welcome individual posts from our members if they're related to space. So you'll have an opportunity to do that. So you'll be able to find the instructions for that as well. So I encourage you to do that, and we look forward to you participating more in the blogs. I know there's a lot of news going around because Crew 9 returned earlier this week. We're very happy about that. Welcome them home, especially Sonny and Butch. But last week, I also had a chance to see the launch of Crew 10, which made Crew 9's return possible. So these are just a few shots of the astronauts as they move, as they do the walkout from the operations and checkout building and head to the launch pad. And then there you see the launch. That picture on the lower right, it's not the best picture, but that is actually a picture of the first stage of the Falcon 9 returning to LZ-1. So we're a good distance away from it, but it takes like about 20 seconds for the sonic booms to reach us. But a great experience to be there. And that's just a couple of things that we share also in the blog. So make sure you get a look at that. So what's coming up with our space forums? We have a town hall coming up 2 weeks from tonight, and this is going to focus in on ISDC 25. So our guests are going to be Gabriel Rothblatt, the conference chair, my membership colleague, Jennifer Muntz, who's doing a lot of organizing around the tours and so on, Aggie Coburn and Rod Pyle. We're going to be able to share a lot of what's going on, give you some insight, what to look for, what to expect. So we hope you can join us for that. 2 weeks after that, we have Joe Carroll, who's going to be doing a talk called Multiplanetary or Interplanetary. And this is a really interesting talk about artificial gravity. Joe has done this at several different venues, and I know it'll be very interesting for you. I do have the invite out to Firefly Aerospace to hopefully talk about Blue Ghost. A number of other invites are out, just trying to get things organized as we fill out the schedule between April and May leading up to the ISDC. So we're looking forward to that. And again, hope you can join us in 2 weeks, and I'll remind you about that as well. So now it's time to get into our program. And this is really becoming an interesting topic. I actually sat in on a panel session at SpaceCom back in January with our guest speaker that had a number of attorneys and space law and policy experts talking about these very issues. And it is really fascinating. So it's my pleasure today to introduce Michelle Hanlon. Michelle is the executive director of the Air and Space Law Program at the University of Mississippi. She is the editor-in-chief of both the Journal of Space Law and the Journal of Drone Law and Policy. And she's also the co-founder, president, and CEO of For All Moonkind, an organization that's dedicated to preserving, our space cultural heritage, especially the Apollo lunar sites, landing sites. So I know she's going to be talking a little bit about some of that tonight. So it is, and also I do want to mention she is also our immediate past president of the NSS. So it's great to welcome her back. She's been on our space forums before. So Michelle, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Bert. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you. Thank you, Larry and Fred. I know how much work goes into these, and I'm just so thrilled to be back. So I am going to share my screen. Hopefully everything will work properly. And also, thank you for joining me. I see a lot of familiar names, old friends, and I see a lot of brand new names. So hopefully we can get everybody engaged and having fun talking about space law. And yes, space needs lawyers, and I'm getting trolled online by some people on X who say, no, no, it doesn't need lawyers. Stop talking about it. But I'm going to show you that we really do. And I like to tell people if you don't like lawyers, it's because you've only had really bad ones. Our job as lawyers is to help you get what you want. And if you have a lawyer who's telling you no instead of, okay, let me think about it and ask how to get what you need the right way, then you've never had a good lawyer. So One of the reasons I sadly had to step down as president of NSS was because at the Center for Air and Space Law, we are starting an exciting new program. So we are a law school. We have a JD concentration in space law. We're the only ABA accredited university in the world to offer that to JD students. So, and we also have an LLM program. That's your Master of Laws. So after it's kind of tipsy-turvy from your master's to PhD, we get our doctorate first and then get the master's. Um, but what we're really excited about now, and the reason I had to step down, is that we are going to be offering a Master of Science of Air and Space Law, an asynchronous online program open to everybody. So you won't have to be a lawyer in advance. And after you complete the program, you will receive a master's degree. That's going to be online, hopefully starting January 2026. And it's been an exciting amount of work. We've been really hoping to use this to increase access to space and access to space law, because what we've realized in the past decade as space law becomes more and more important, um, not enough people know about it. Not enough people, we all know that we are in a bubble, not enough people know about space, but there are so many gaps in space law and so many questions to be answered. And right now they're being answered by a very teeny tiny population of humanity. And that's, I think, really not a good sign, considering the decisions that we make today are going to affect all of humanity for generations to come. As Bert mentioned, I'm also the co-founder of For All Moonkind. We are the only organization in the world that are committed, focused on protecting cultural heritage in outer space, and we always use the Apollo lunar landing sites as an example. There is nothing protecting the lunar landing sites, whether it's Apollo or Luna or Chang'e or Chandrayaan at all. There are some laws that protect the objects, but for example, anybody can go to the surface of the moon and erase Neil Armstrong's, the very first boot print, very first footstep of a human on another celestial body. We believe that's criminal. We also believe that agreeing to identify and protect human heritage in outer space is the first step towards reducing the potential for conflict in space. Toward that end, we've also created the Institute on Space Law and Ethics. What we found in the past 8 years that we've been attending, I should have mentioned For All Moonkind is a permanent observer to the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. What we found is that we're not going to agree on space law, right? It is very hard to think about implementing a new treaty at this point. And so what we can do and what we're doing at the Institute is trying to find those foundational ethics, those ideas that everybody can agree to and gather around and embrace across all of cultures and geographies. And what that the Institute would like to sort of boil all of these down so we have a starting point where everyone is on the same starting line. I want to start, and I should say I got all of your questions in advance, and I think I tried to weave in as many answers as I could. I'm going to go through. I can't see the chat or participants, so I will save questions for the end. But of course, Bert can, or somebody can raise a flag if there's something that's really pressing. So I love these two pictures side by side because it shows you the beginning of an era and the acceleration of that era. That picture is Apollo 11, the shadow on the moon, and of course the other picture is Firefly. So we have this first step um, from Apollo, a program that employed 400,000 Americans, really just the culmination of not just American dreams, but dreams of all humanity. I mean, how every culture has looked up at the moon and thought about what would it be like? What is it made of? Is it cheese? And remember, when they touched down, we had no idea. We didn't know if they were going to sink down into nothingness. I mean, what the Apollo astronauts accomplished is really incredibly courageous and incredibly remarkable. And Firefly is it's the second commercial company to land softly on the moon, but the first to stick the landing. And so what we're going to see, this is the beginning of a new era where we're seeing CLPS missions, the commercial lunar payload missions, just relentless. We're going back and we're going back and we're going back. We are sending all sorts of stuff to the moon right now, and it is really, really exciting. But it, it's also a little scary because nothing's protecting that Firefly, that blue ghost either. And so we have this comparison. So back in 1969, we had this wonderful plaque, the Neil and Buzz came in peace for all humankind. And we have Blue Ghost, its last transmission, sort of saying, well, now we're in monument mode, and announcing that it will hold vigil on this spot to watch humanity's continued journey to the stars, which is, wow, really so moving. I do find it interesting that it says, I will outlast your mightiest rivers, your tallest mountains, and perhaps even your species as we know it, as, hey, sorry, Blue Ghost, you're not protected either. Anybody can come over and knock you over and try and mine whatever's underneath you. So we really have to think about what it means to have an object on the moon and what legal rights you have with respect to that object. So this is the agenda that was put in the description of this lecture, and there is a lot of ground to cover. The race for lunar resources and what it means for property rights, the role of COPAWIS, the role of the Artemis Accords and the Chinese-led International Lunar Research Station project, the growing complexities of mission authorization, and key developments, including the proposal to deorbit space station. And I am hopefully going to cover them all within the next 40 minutes. So the first concept, and this is something, to all of those who think space doesn't need lawyers, well, you know what? The very first thing we need to do is to identify what space is, right? If we go all the way back to Roman law, we have this concept of res nullius. Space belongs to no one. So that means you can go there and do whatever you want and you can claim it. And you have the concept of res communis. Space belongs to everyone. Well, that gives you the sense of this global commons. Well, if you do something in space, do you have to share it? It belongs to everybody. Everybody has a shared responsibility. And what we're finding is the international community seems to want to find some middle ground there. When we think about why is it important to talk about property in space? Well, we're headed back. Artemis 3 is the US program to put the first woman and the first person of color on the moon in 2024. Whoops. I think right now our Artemis 2 is scheduled for 2026, and our Artemis 3 is 2028. Of course, now everything is a little bit in upheaval. Are we going to Mars and forsaking the moon? Are we doing moon to Mars still? We really don't know. But right now, we do know that we still have in place and are still working towards building Lunar Gateway, having a permanent human presence on or near the moon. Of course, the United States is not the only one. China and Russia have teamed up in the International Lunar Research Station, and they want to put a lunar base on the moon by 2027, a joint base. And China has announced that it's going to put humans back on the moon by 2030. So those timelines look awfully similar, right? One thing to keep in mind is that China updates its space white papers every 5 years. And since it has been producing those white papers and setting these goals for themselves, it has not missed a goal. China uh, reaches all of its timelines. So if China is saying 2027, they will have a moon base by 2027. If they are going to have humans back on the moon by 2030, they will have humans back on the moon by 2030. So this is something to really think about when we think about commercial space, when we think about property in space, when we think about what is at risk, what is at play when we talk about space. And through this particular presentation, I hope to show you that there is a huge amount at stake because we are in a race with China, and we have to recognize that because China thinks they're in a race. And if only one person in the race thinks they're in the race, we know who's going to win. And it's about the same thing that it was in the Cold War. It's about the strategic it's sorry, it's not Cold War was not about sort of strategic. It was about proving that the socialist system was better or the democratic system was better. That is an undercurrent with respect to this race between the United States and China. But there's also a strategic element because we don't know, we don't have definitions, we don't have laws that establish what is property in space. What does it mean if somebody's at a place you want to be before you? And it's very important to be able to be in a position to have a say in how those rules are decided. So the International Lunar Research Station has about 14 partners, uh, state partners. This is really important because when we think about the fact that we're not establishing new laws, um, what we're doing is we're establishing norms. And norms are things that countries sort of agree to. So China installs its lunar base on the moon and then says, hey, we have put all of these instruments over this 20 square mile area. Don't come close. And oh, it just happens to be on the lunar South Pole. Well, all of these countries aligned with China are going to say, oh, yes, China is right. And all of a sudden, you have this concept that there's a norm because 14 countries have all agreed to this certain thing. Well, good news is Artemis has 53 countries. And so when we think about how this is going to be established, how norms are going to be established, if the United States can get there first, we have a far larger crowd of countries that will follow the norms that we establish. I will note 53 is the number now that is half of the members of the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, and well over the 18 states that executed or ratified the Moon Agreement. So the Artemis Accords are doing very well. Also, very important to be reminded, however, that the Artemis Accords are not a treaty. They are principles. They are a political commitment that all of these countries agree that they are going to interpret things in certain ways or act in certain ways. But there still, we don't have, even amongst our Artemis partners, any tried and true rules. We have concepts of, yeah, when we get there, we'll talk about safety zones or notification zones. And when we get there, we'll talk about heritage protection. And, we should have standardized ops and sort of things. But this is all stuff that is still being worked through. So we don't have those laws yet. And of course, like I said, it's a race. We are all going to the South Pole. Why? Because that's where we think there's a lot of water that's easily accessible. I know there are people on this call who can explain that much better, but essentially, what we need to find and get access to first in order to support humans on the moon is water, because we can break that down into hydrogen and oxygen. We can use that to nourish ourselves, and we can use it for energy as well. And the lunar South Pole, with its peaks of eternal lights, offer round the clock energy to be able to go ahead and mine. And the very deep pockets in those craters, we believe, we don't know yet, hold the largest sort of pockets of water ice. So in this race, which also includes commercial entities like Firefly, we have a little bit of law. And when I say a little bit of law, I really mean a little bit of law. You can fit all of international space law on one slide. The larger documents are the treaties. They are signed and bound and ratified. The Moon Agreement, which sort of went a little bit too far for many countries in terms of determining how we're going to characterize outer space, only has 18 signatories. Saudi Arabia just removed itself, and so they're down to 17. The Outer Space Treaty has about 105 signatories, and Russia, China, and the United States, and I think every spacefaring country, current spacefaring country, has ratified. The smaller print you see, those are non-binding resolutions that have been established by the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. They are not binding, but each of those has been reached by consensus. So if you are a member of the COPUOS and you have and this has gone through while you were a member, then you have tacitly agreed to those provisions. And so many lawyers will argue that they have the weight of law. what is important about the Outer Space Treaty, and for all of you who say space doesn't need lawyers, well, guess what? It's lawyers who established that the exploration and use of outer space shall be the province of all humankind. That the moon and other celestial bodies and outer space shall be free for exploration and use by all states, and there shall be free access to all areas of celestial bodies. So you can do anything you want in space. And this is something I really try to hammer home with my commercial industry clients. You can do anything you want in space. There are very few limits on what you can do. We have Article 4, which says you can't place weapons of mass destruction or nuclear weapons in outer space. And we're going to talk about Article 2 at some length. But fundamentally, a bunch of lawyers got together and negotiated a treaty that made the exploration and use of space the province of all humankind. So the only people who can be angry about that are the other people living in space, right? That is something, we have established. What does the province of all humankind mean? I don't know. Nobody knows. There's no legal definition, but we know it's something less than a global commons. And we know that we might have experienced a little bit of hubris when we talked about all of outer space, because a later agreement, the Moon Agreement, actually says, well, we're going to stick to the solar system. Um, Article 2, we all know Article 2. You can't own property in outer space. Basically, that's how it's been interpreted. But that is not the proper interpretation, I would argue. Outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. Okay. Um, it's not subject to national appropriation. When Elon Musk lands on Mars, do you think he's going to claim it by sovereignty? No, he's not a sovereign. So does that give us the wiggle room we need to say, well, okay, a state, you know, can't claim property in space. You can't claim territory. It's not subject to national appropriation. If I go to the moon and want to carve out a little patch for myself, that's not national appropriation. That's individual appropriation. And wait a minute, because the Outer Space Treaty is principles and guidelines binding states, not individuals at all. So why are we even talking about it? Well, we have Article 6. Article 6 says that national activities in outer space, whether such activities are carried on by governmental agencies or by non-governmental entities, um, the state is internationally responsible for those activities. Now, we have a lot of lawyers arguing about, what does national activities mean? Does that mean any national doing activities? Or does that mean you have to be a national that's actually doing an activity on behalf of your government? See, we need lawyers to be able to discuss what is the proper interpretation of that, to be able to negotiate how we interpret that. And then it says in conformity with the treaty. Well, it doesn't say non-governmental entities have to abide by the treaty, which should be very strong, clear language, right? It says in conformity with. So to me, that's something less than all your national entities are bound by the treaty. And we also see that we're going to talk about towards the end, this concept of authorization and continuing supervision. One of the reasons the United States has the most robust regulatory system for space activities is because we don't want our taxpayers bearing international responsibility for stupidity. And we have this requirement to continue to authorize and supervise. So who is bound by Article 2? Well, you know what? The Declaration of Human Rights states in Article 17 that every human has the right to own property. It doesn't say real property, but it says property. Okay. So does that right go away when we go to space? What it doesn't say that anywhere. Do we cease to become human? Do we cease to have rights when we go to space? I don't think so. So we have to interpret Article 2 with international law in mind. And international law is very clear that you can own property. Property is a fundamental right that has been with humans for millennia. I mean, you don't think that there were some people back in uh, 3000 BC, 3 million years ago, who didn't fight over, the rock that was perfectly shaped like a knife? That's property. You don't think that later, as we became more agricultural bound, cultivating, that people didn't say, "Hey, don't come in my carrot patch." No, that property gives you pride of ownership. It gives you a responsibility. It gives you something to care for, and it's yours. You have put all of that work into it. A lot of people say, well, that's not always true. The indigenous community, they don't have property. They see themselves as stewards. Well, I was at the Smithsonian for Native American history a couple of weeks ago, and I ran into this about the viewpoint of Native nations. For Indian people, land was the foundation of their existence as nations. It shaped their identity, their spiritual practices, and cultures. Tribes had national territories they defended from invaders. Guess what? That's property. So to think that we can go to space and not have property rights, think that humans should lose that right, that fundamental right that is a foundation of existence, is poppycock. Another issue with Article 2 is the question of celestial bodies. There's no definition of celestial bodies. Okay. You need lawyers here. Do you really want to treat the moon the same way you treat some comet, that a little bit of dust and ice frozen together? Do you think that if the oldest meteorite on Earth, which has landed on Earth, is a celestial body? It came from the heavens. We don't have a definition of celestial body. And I would argue, we don't want the moon to be considered in the same category as some asteroid that we haven't seen yet, right? The moon has a special place in our hearts. Maybe we're going to protect Oumuamua a little bit more, but there are a lot of things out there that are called celestial bodies that are lumped into this concept of celestial bodies, that frankly, specks of dust, the dust that have has caused um, you know dents in the windshield of shuttle. Are are those celestial bodies? If it says you can't own a celestial body, does that mean you can't pick up, if your spacecraft gets hit by a small comet and it's stuck in your hull, you have to give it back to space? So a lot of questions out there that lawyers need to get together to answer. And it's a negotiation. And that's one of the reasons, again, we are creating this Master of Science of Law at the University of Mississippi, because we need a lot more voices than just the few space lawyers that we have out there now. Pointing out inconsistencies in the treaty as well. We have Article 2, which says you can't own property, you can't claim territory. But then we have Article 12, which says that, well, if you have a station or installation, then you have to have it open to representatives on a basis of reciprocity. So it suggests that you can put stuff on other celestial bodies, and it suggests that you have a right to not have it, right? Because if the treaty says you you have to make it open on a basis of reciprocity, that means you have something that you have a right, maybe, that you don't have to leave it open. And on the basis of reciprocity, well, I'm betting the United States and China aren't going to be happy to just let each other traipse over their installations and equipment. So a lot of inconsistencies even within the treaty that we have to deal with. The final part of the treaty that I want to talk about tonight is Article 9, due regard. So Article 9 says that you shall conduct your activities in space with due regard for the activities of others. Due regard is a great term, right? It sounds so good. We use it in the Convention of the Law of the Sea as well. You will have due regard. What does that mean? We don't know. We have had one case from built from the Convention on the Law of the Sea about what due regard might mean. And what do we want in space, right? What do our investors want in space? We want bright line rules. We want to know, hey, if I land here, then I have, I can go 10 paces in either direction, and any direction, and I have the right to exclude people from that. Well, due regard says, well, we're going to look at the nature of the rights and their importance and the extent of the impairment and the nature and the importance of the rights of the other person and the availability of alternative approaches. Have you heard anything more wishy-washy? This is what I call the lawyer's cha-ching provision. When you have a rule like this, which is based on what we call the totality of the circumstances, then you can argue this rule for decades. You can hold up operations for decades as you continue to go to court and appeal decisions. In the law we have what we call the orders, or sorry, the I just blanked on the name, but we lawyers, litigators use motions. It's a motion practice. I motion this, I motion that. That costs a lot of money. Um, and often large corporations use a motion practice to squash little lawsuits because the little guy, little gal can't pay their lawyer to answer all of these motions. But this is essentially what due regard does, is it creates a bank account for lawyers. And that's something lawyers need to address so we don't have that. Of course, when we think about due regard, what does that mean with respect to heritage? Is it showing due regard for that boot print if you erase it or step on it? So what is this concept? This is something we really need to start thinking about. And as we think about what due regard is, we have to understand also that there's a lot of controversy involved. Who's going to decide what due regard is? In last year, Astrobotic sent up a spacecraft, Peregrine, that did not make it to the moon, but it was intended to make it to the moon, and it had with it the cremains of more than 100 people. These are people who, if you read, you can go on the website and read about their stories. So much commitment, so much love, so much passion for the moon, for space flight, for whatever reason they felt that they wanted their ashes on the moon. But it violated deep principles of the Navajo Nation. And there was a big kerfuffle last winter about it. And Celestis said, well, it doesn't matter, because Navajo Nation, you can't just project your religion to the moon and make everybody else in the world subject to it. And Navajo Nation said, no, we agree, but we want to have a say. And we want to think about what's going to the moon and what we're doing with the moon. And this is something that we're not doing yet. Um, the moon is something very special across all of our diverse geographies and cultures. And these are just, we have the man in the moon from the West. We have the rabbit in the moon from China. And we have also, interestingly, this sort of the sailor moon myth from Arabic nations. So we have, I was asked by a reporter the other day, how long has humanity been, so enthralled by space? And I said, since the beginning of time. I mean, you don't think that that person 3 million years ago who was fighting, who those two were fighting over the stone shaped like a knife, you don't think they looked up at the heavens, at the stars, and wondered at their beauty? You don't think they looked at the moon and wondered why it got smaller and then larger? You don't think they looked at the stars and tried to name them? So we have been fixated on space for millennia, and especially on the moon, which is our closest partner. I don't think we ought to treat the moon like anything else in space. And yet we are just sending anything we can. I love this concept of these art on the moon, right? So this is artist Jeff Koons. Somebody else is sent a house to the moon, right? And they're claiming it's art. So again, is it art because you sent it to the moon? I- Would it be art here? And they say this is not only is it art, it's going to be cultural heritage. Okay, if I paint something, Michelle Hanlon, I'm a terrible drawer. If I paint something and I send it to the moon, does that make it cultural heritage because it's art? So we really have to start thinking, the moon, if we are going to treat the moon like a second home for humanity, as we should, do we really want to just keep sending junk up there and call it art? Of course, we do have a precedent for it, right? Charlie Duke left his photo of his family on the moon. If Charlie Duke can do it, why can't I? There's we've left the astronaut memorial, um, and we have this little tablet of the tile, the infamous tile, is it there, is it not? That was supposed to be, that might have been attached to the LEM of Apollo 12. There's a whole PBS special about whether it's there or not. Of course, it would have been a violation of the rules and regulations if it is. But we have this precedent from back in the 70s, where people did just leave stuff on the moon. There's a feather and a hammer. There's two golf balls. But is that the right precedent that we want to follow now? And so when we think about property and we think about space, right? Um, we had that concept handed down by the Romans: res nullius belongs to no one, res communis belongs to everyone. We have something completely different in space. We have the concept of the province of all humankind and due regard for all. And we don't know what that means. And it's our job as lawyers, as people who are going to study space law in my new master's program, to understand and to agree about what that means. Well, where are we now? Well, we know that the United States has passed a law signed by President Obama in 2015 that says, okay, uh, we hear you, Article 2, but if you scoop something out of another celestial body, um, then you can own it. So if you obtain a resource, so you're not claiming territory, you're not violating Article 2 if you scoop something out of another celestial body. And indeed, then Administrator Bridenstine actually had an RFP to purchase regolith from a commercial entity. And it wasn't to purchase it and bring it back. It was, hey, just scoop it up and we'll buy it. And some of the bids came in, I think one was $1, right? And so the idea is, look, um, it is impossible to think that you can't at least use these resources, especially if you have gone through the trouble of obtaining them. That law was followed by laws in Luxembourg, UAE, and Japan. India has a policy that looks like it's going to go the same way. And of course, the Artemis Accords also say that their interpretation of Article 2 is that you can use any of the resources that you obtain in space, and that's not a violation. And interestingly enough, the Chinese position is not that different. So you see here the Artemis Accords say the signatories affirm that the extraction of space resources does not inherently constitute national appropriation. The Chinese position that was shared with the UN COPOIS last year, the exploration and use of space resources shall be in conformity with the principle of non-appropriation. Guess what? China needs to use the resources too, because nobody wants to bring their own bricks and mortar to build a house on Mars or the moon, right? We are going to need to use the resources that we have in space. We are going to need to be able to buy and sell those resources that we have in space in order to build the universal economy that is going to power humanity into deep space. Um, so we do have this sort of growing understanding that it's common sense that we are able to use the resources in space. But we still haven't, everyone's dancing around the concept of property, but we're working towards it. At the UN, a couple years ago, they formed a working group to address the legal issues of space resource utilization. This was formed under the auspices of the legal subcommittee. And as you can imagine, it has not gone very far. Okay, I think what the first question was, how should we define space resource? And we had the US submit the US position, which is, basically anything abiotic. And then the Russian position is everything in space is a resource. And so, coming to understand that there's a meeting of the legal subcommittee coming up in May, where we hope to see some more movement there. Unfortunately, the chair of the committee, Andrzej Michtal, a remarkable Polish diplomat, passed away. Stephen Freeland is filling his shoes, and if anybody can do it, it's him. But it'll be interesting to see how far that group progresses. The good news is we have another group. It's called the ATLAC, Action Team on Lunar Activities Consultation. So here we have Romania made this suggestion under the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee that, okay, we have this big legal working group that's going to think out the big thoughts of how we determine what is a space resource and what we can do with the space resource. But in the meantime, we're going back to the moon. And there's a lot of people going back to the moon. So we got to do something. At the very least, we got to be talking to each other. So the ATLAC was agreed to facilitate the examination of a consultative mechanism on sustainable lunar activities and address the numerous issues facing future missions. So really important here, um, it is not the consultative mechanism. It is a group that is going to meet to determine what the consultative mechanism might look like. But it was first proposed last February 2024. It has moved forward slowly, continuously. They've agreed to chair and co-chair, and now we're looking at the what we call the terms of reference. What exactly are we agreeing that ATLAC should do? One of the really exciting things about ATLAC is there is a real push, and the Secretary of the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, Arti Holomeni, is really, she came over from ITU, the IT International Telecommunications Union, which actually allows commercial industry to participate. So what we're seeing with ATLAC is sort of a break in the Chinese and Russian stranglehold on not allowing any industry in. We're starting to see them thinking, okay, we will allow some opinions from commercial industry. And this is important because look at this. The number one U.S. space policy priority, was promulgated under the Biden administration in 2021, is to maintain a robust and responsible U.S. space enterprise. And that includes, as the first bullet item, fostering a policy and regulatory environment that enables a competitive and burgeoning U.S. commercial space sector. The United States is so committed to commercial space. It's in the NASA code. It's in the Defense Department code. NASA and the DoD are required to use commercial services. We want to build a space economy, and so we are going to allow our government to be the anchor client for all these exciting new activities. And that is really important. That is setting the stage, setting the pace for the world, and the reason we're going to win the race against China. So again, remember, though, that we do have this Article 6. So we really want in the United States to support our industry, right? But we do have international responsibility. We don't really want to be arguing in court over what is a national activity, what is not. So we are going to authorize and supervise. And that's worked really well. The FAA is responsible for launch, the safety of the launch, and our launches have been very safe. There have been some catastrophic ones, but no loss of human life. The FCC handles radio frequencies, and the Department of Commerce handles remote sensing satellites. But there's so many other new space activities, and nobody knows where to go, right? So, for example, Astroforge announced last fall that they got the first license ever to land on an asteroid, a commercial entity landing on an asteroid. They got that license from the FCC. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission? What? So the FCC has also really just been very aggressive. They're monitoring space debris. They have debris remediation guidelines. So all of a sudden we have to go to the FCC and the FAA for our launch. But where do we go if we want to build a space hotel? Where do we go if we want to have open a space tourism company and shoot people into space? Where do we go if we want to mine regolith? Where do we go if we want to mine an asteroid? Where do we go if we want to sell regolith or build a pharmaceutical factory in space? We don't know. We don't have a mission authorization system in the United States. In 2023, Biden proposed that novel space activities would be divided between two departments. If humans were involved, it would go to the Department of Transportation and the FAA. If it was just robotic, it would go to the Department of Commerce. Well, okay. Um, can you see an issue here? I mean, when if you have a robotic mission, and then you send a human, then does it go back to DOT? Do they have to share? What if you send the human first and then send a robot? Then does it transfer from commerce? So where do you go first? This is the kind of question that we need to answer so that investors get the certainty that they need and the comfort to invest. Um, Congressman Babin and Lucas proposed differently. They wanted to have a one-stop shop, likely through the Commerce Department, and create a certification process. Don't create binding rules. Don't say, if you are going to set up a pharmacy in space, you must do these 18 things. No, let's just come to us with your idea and we'll talk it through with you and we'll decide what to do. Interestingly, so in 2020, President Trump signed an executive order that categorically said what every single president of the United States has said since Ike Eisenhower: space is not a global commons. And this mission authorization bill by Babin and Lucas also said space is not a global commons and wants to see that in the US code. The other thing that they want to see in the US code, interestingly, is that planetary protection rules promulgated by the Committee on Space Research should not apply, do not automatically apply to commercial industry. So really interesting to think about what this mission authorization is going to look like. Neither of these bills have been introduced in this new Congress, but I think there's going to be a lot going on with Babin and Lucas. We're going to be seeing bills about space station, orbital debris, spaceports, and this mission authorization. I can't answer the question of whether we're going to go to the moon or Mars, whether we're going to forsake Mars, the moon to go to Mars, but I can tell you it's a really, really important question. We are deorbiting space station in 2030. Elon Musk has suggested, oh no, we should deorbit it earlier, 2028. That would be a strategic error. Because if Tiangong, if the Chinese space station is the only space station on orbit, that's going to give the Chinese sort of a kind of a feeling of superiority, literally looking down on the West, right? So we really want to have a U.S. commercial or an allied commercial space station on orbit before we lose station. And the orbit is really a gateway. Imagine if we don't have a space station. What have we seen China doing? We've seen China starting to create co-orbital satellites that can follow other satellites, that can hit and disable satellites. They have developed space lasers. The Chinese believe space is a warfighting domain. This was not an invention of the United States. And so the PLA Space Force, uh, I'm sorry, you can't trust it. I mean, we have to assume, and there's when you look at the DoD documents, it's all deterrence, 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 deterrence. We need to be able to deter. That is the only way we maintain at least equality, if not superiority. So a lot of conflict in space, fear of China, who's going to win this race? Why is it important? Well, one thing I can tell you is that one thing we agree on in Earth on Earth is the protection of heritage. Every single nation has signed the World Heritage Convention, and so thus we have this footprint in Laetoli, Tanzania, fully protected under international law. You go and you try and erase that, you're going to get um, I was just going to say you're going to get shot. You probably won't get shot. You'll get imprisoned. But you go and erase that boot print, nothing happens. Maybe a little outcry, whatever. We need to protect that boot print. And it's something we can agree on because China also has Chang'e 4, first mission to the far side of the moon, successful. They want to protect that. This is part of human history. And so we can agree on protecting human history. And if we can protect one, then we can alleviate the risk of conflict in the other, right? If we start thinking about safety and notification zones around heritage sites, then worry about that where we all have the same goal in mind, protecting what is invaluable to humanity, saving it for future generations to be inspired. We can start thinking about what safety zones ought to look like when we want to protect these things, and then borrow those same ideas for when we're talking about actually mining, landing, building on the lunar South Pole. So I'm hoping your key takeaways are that space needs lawyers, of course. It's time to fill in the gaps in space law. We really need lawyers to assure that we have a flexible, light hand regulatory framework for new space activities to bring certainty to the industry. We want we have a good law, space law force that can help Congress and help regulatory agencies design the right kind of regulations. We need to tighten legal descriptions. What is a celestial body? What does due regard mean? These are things we really need to sort of think about. Um, there is definitely a race to establish new norms, and we want Artemis to win it. Why? It's not just us versus China. It's not sort of the commies and Cold War. No, the things that happen today are going to affect humanity for millennia. In the United States, when there's a rule, somebody wants to do something, the government wants to launch to Mars. There's a process. For example, we talk about the regulatory framework. Every time the FAA wants to institute a new rule, it has to submit to the general public an NPRM, a notice of proposed rulemaking. And the public has the opportunity to comment on it. And guess what? The FAA, every government agency, is required by law to read every single comment and respond. And you can respond to groups and there's finer language, but you have a say. You in the United States, by virtue of being a US citizen, you have a say in how we go to space. You have a say in what we send to the moon. You have a say in how we do it because that is how our democracy works. Guess what? The Chinese Communist Party does not ask its citizenry what they think. That is what is so important. What rule of law, what model of governance do we want to be in existence 100 years from now? The UN COPOIS and the ATLAC do offer a path forward, at least in support of transparency. So I'm not suggesting we're going to get some new treaty from the COPOIS, but what we are seeing is a willingness, and this is the beauty of the United Nations. You can call it useless, you can call it whatever you want, but Russia, China, and the United States have met in that boardroom in Vienna. Well, it started in New York, but every year, 3 times a year since 1958, and no war has stopped that. That is important. At least they are all in the same room. Maybe they're talking over each other. They're not banging shoes yet, but they are talking. And finally, space needs lawyers because we need property rights in space, and we need them to be defined and established before it's too late. And of course, we need to protect our heritage, starting with Apollo. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Do you want to stop sharing?
Yeah, let me see.
Okay.
There.
That's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
One question I want to ask that maybe helps define things, because I saw a number of questions that were submitted on the negative side that we don't need more agreements or laws. Isn't there enough regulation? Can you can you provide a distinction between what an international agreement is and how that works versus, for example, the FAA regulating because of safety? To me, they're two distinct things, and maybe people need to better understand what they are.
Absolutely. So, um, what we see when the space law is actually a bucket of public international law, and this comes out of the sovereign paradigm, the Treaty of Westphalia, and so forth. We were fighting so much that humans decided we're going to build our own little communities, and then we're going to elect people, or people will elect themselves to represent us in the international stage. And so when we talk about areas, and so we created our Earth based on this concept of sovereignty property, if you will. And there are two areas on Earth that don't have sovereignty, Antarctica and the high seas. And so we saw in the 50s and 60s, these sovereigns came together to talk about Antarctica, the high seas, and space, all areas where nobody has sovereignty. And so they created laws to help preserve that. And so when we talk about these international laws and activities of states in space, these are very high level. This is how you should conduct your activities. So those are the laws that we have in place, that one slide. And we're probably not going to get a lot of international law again.
Mm.
What we would love to see in international law is a statement that you can own property in space, or Article 2 means this, Article 2 means that, just so we don't fight over it later. Um, in the United States, we have tons and tons of regulations to protect the safety of people on Earth during a launch, to protect satellites on orbit from harmful interference from radio frequencies. And these are all basically US to US, but also, US responsibilities to the international community. We don't want if SpaceX doesn't launch over Mexico because we don't want to, hit some houses in Mexico. And so those regulations are the ones we're talking about when we think about going to looking at the Biden administration and the Babin concepts of mission authorization. And so those are the ones, I personally prefer the Babin method. Hey, let's not regulate, things we don't really know about. If you have something you want to do in space, come to us and we will help make sure that it's safe, and that you're not just shooting up something that's going to hit a Russian satellite and cause all this destruction.
Right. In terms of the of international agreements, does civil aviation offer any guidance? I mean, we've got planes flying everywhere to different countries, and everyone seems to see it. It seems to work at this point. Can that offer any kind of guidance?
Absolutely, Bert. It's a great point. The difference, of course, is that the air system was based on sovereignty. And so everyone agreed, hey, I can't fly my plane over your country without your permission.
Right.
And so we're all going to agree to these same, because you won't give me that permission unless you know my airplane is safe. So we're going to agree in the Chicago Convention on all of the ways to make our airplane safe. And you have the right to tell me I can't fly in your country. But we want to support commerce. And so we're going to build these models so that we can make everybody safe. We can do something like that in space.
Right.
But remember, we don't have that ability to say keep out. I actually, I've talked to a lot of people about borrowing from the maritime tradition. There's a lot of traditions in maritime that that are like right of way. If that's what we need to draw on with respect to satellites, especially when we're talking about getting 40,000 Starlink satellites and 80,000 Chinese satellites and 320,000 Rwandan satellites. We're going to really have to figure out those rules of the road.
Uh, One of the things I found interesting is when you're talking about, let's say, whoever gets there first again. I mean, we didn't go the first time to claim it; it was to explore. But now we want to go back to utilize the resources. But I remember one of the key things when Sputnik happened. Obviously, it caused a lot of angst, but it also gave us an advantage in that the Russians did it, the Soviets did it first, flying over all these other countries, and they established that precedent. Is that something that you see happening with whoever might get back there first?
So I love the story of Eisenhower, and I'm so glad you brought it up, Bert, because there is rumor has it, or some historians suggest that Eisenhower actually slowed down our satellite program so that the Soviets would get there first, because we knew the Soviets were really hell bent on being first, and we knew they weren't thinking about the policy implications of it. So when that Sputnik flew over, I think 70 times. President Eisenhower made the strategic decision not to complain about it, because he could have said, hey, you're flying over our space. You can't do that. We claim sovereignty over it. And he didn't, because obviously he wanted to be able to fly over the Soviet Union. And when the United States went to the UN and said, oh, the Soviet Union has just established the freedom of exploration and use of space, the Soviets were like, no, 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 only for scientific purposes. What are you talking about? And that didn't win out ultimately, but it's a fun story.
Yes, absolutely. I saw a number of questions, and maybe we're getting way ahead of ourselves because we don't have settlements in space. but I want to try to take those because we got a lot of other questions, but it has to do with crime in space and punishment in space. I mean, we don't, you're not really have any settlements yet where we have lots of people where that might occur. But are there, are there discussions about those types of things, or is it premature?
No, it's not premature at all. I mean, sadly, human nature is human nature, right? We haven't had crimes in space yet. We had the one sort of conflagration. Now, did she was Cindy McLean, right? Did she hack the bank account, from space? And um, but it's going to happen. And especially when we think about space tourism, space hotels, you don't think someone's going to nick a pen from somebody else's room or whatever. And we are thinking about it. Canada, for example, has made the statement, has signed into law, into its code, that Canadian criminal code applies to Canadians in space. U.S. criminal code applies to Americans in space. And so when we think about a crime happening in a spacecraft, it's pretty easy. Think about it like a flagship, right? So if it happens in a US spacecraft, US law will apply. Um, you can also make the argument if it happens in a habitat built by the US, then US law will apply. It starts to get a little trickier when you have a bunch of maybe a joint venture between two different nationals whose laws will apply. We have the model of the space station, which says whichever module you're in, that law applies.
Okay.
And so, but if you are an American in the Russian module, and a crime occurs, then you have some basically you need an extradition treaty. So as far as crime goes, right now, we're bringing all of our sovereignty with us into space.
Okay. Uh, Number of questions that were submitted had to do with enforcement mechanisms. And you were talking about, still lawyers have a lot still to figure out, but in the end, do we need an international space court, something like that, or how do you get these resolved?
So, yes, when we think about sort of how we mature the law, right? In the United States, we have bankruptcy courts because bankruptcy law we saw as unique and complex. And if a judge knows bankruptcy, then you want the same judge doing the same kind of stuff and learning from past cases and so forth. So it would be ideal to have a space court where the law, where the cases are binding and you have the same concepts over and over and over again. To pull from aviation again, we have a very unique treaty in private aviation, which um, creates limits on liability for commercial aircraft accidents. And this treaty is litigated all over the world, but we have those basic concepts, and there's different interpretations of what is harm, how much would you get for the harm, but we have that one sort of, this is the rule. You will not get more than 100,000 SDRs for something. So that kind of stability in space, any kind of certainty that we can get would be ideal. Um, yeah, I avoided all the enforcement questions because this is still, it's public international law. What are you gonna do? It's that name and shame and wag your finger, which is actually more effective than people realize. I mean, if you're driving down the street and you get to a stop sign and there's nobody around, are you going to run that stop sign? You might, and if you
Some
get
people
caught,
do.
you're not going to be like, no, I didn't. You're going to be
Right,
like, yeah, okay, I
right.
broke the law. Sorry. Yeah, I'll take the ticket. So,
Well, you talked about the importance of lawyers in space. Marcus asked the question, where are space attorneys primarily working today for NGOs, governments, private companies?
yeah, Marcus, all of the above. What we're seeing is we're seeing a new sort of stage in law, space law. We've gone for the last 60 years, it's been all about academia. All these, like I said, space law is a subset of public international law, and public international law is filled with people who think deep thoughts and say a lot of big Latin words. And that's what space law was until very recently. I came to the University of Mississippi in 2018. When I started, we only had 3 students in our LLM program. And those students were like, I don't know where I'm going to go. Now we have 40 students in our LLM program. We have 20 students in our JD concentration program, and we're placing people at ULA, at NASA, at the FAA. What we're seeing is most space lawyers are going to government agencies because the startups don't. It's basically how the law profession works. Most companies don't want lawyers fresh out of law school. They want you to go to a law firm and learn stuff. They don't want to train you. But we are seeing more and more law firms with space law practices as well. And that's going to include everything from telecommunications law to lunar resource mining to companies that need. One of the things we didn't talk about was the military uses of space, but understanding if you are providing services to the Defense Department, what kind of protections you can expect from the United States and so forth. So it's a really growing area. Stephen Freeland from Australia, like me, he was a commercial lawyer for 25 years before he became a space lawyer. He said 2 years ago, 10 years from now, if you are not, if you are a lawyer and you don't know space law, you will guaranteed be malpracticing your client. That is how important space is going to be to all of our lives within the decade.
I see a question from Christopher there. Do you have any suggestions for a lawyer from Central America that wants to start a career in space law?
Come to Ole Miss, where you can take our classes online. There are a number of uh, lawyers in Central America. Costa Rica is very, very active at the COPUOS. They have invested in the Dark and Quiet Skies movement, which is the idea that we need to protect some of our skies so that we can see the stars. And there is a yeah, I would say Costa Rica, of Central America, Costa Rica has the strongest space concepts. But there are a number, and I can pop my email in the chat, and I'm happy to connect you with Central American lawyers. Let's
That'd
see.
be great. Yeah. And you kind of touched on a question I had. What got you interested in space law?
So th- I was a child of Star Trek, and I wanted to be an astronaut. I mean, we all did, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And I I could not get through calculus. I just couldn't. And back in the day, there was not a whole lot of other, ways to get support. And I just thought, okay, that's done. And I went on to get a degree in political science and then my law degree. I love being a lawyer. I really enjoyed law school. I did 25 years of mergers and acquisitions work. I started doing a lot of technology work, mostly in cybersecurity. And one day, my son, he was about 11 or 12 years old, came up to me and he said, Mom, I just read a book called Who Owns the Moon by this guy from named Virgil Pop. He's from Romania or something. He said, I'm concerned. And I was like, okay, why? He said, did you read it? I want to mine asteroids when I grow up. You're a pretty good lawyer, right? And I was like, I'd like to think so. He's like, can you figure this out before I grow up? And I was like, sure, honey.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So yeah, no, I read the book and I just was fascinated. And I knew, yeah, I really love the game of negotiating that contract, but I just feel like I can give back so much more, um, protecting the moon, the heritage on the moon.
Oh, fabulous. I see a message a question that came in from Faisal. Um, can a country restrict landing at any specific sites on the moon?
Right now, a country cannot restrict anything on the, like there is this concept of due regard suggests that if you land somewhere, and we know that the regolith can be very damaging, right? And so if you land on in Shackleton Crater and somebody comes right next to you, we know already, scientists know, we've proven that that regolith can do tremendous amounts of damage to your vehicle, to your spacecraft. And so um, the concept of due regard exists. And so I think um, you ought to be able to have a argument under due regard that your due regard has been violated. But of course, this is what I talked about, right? What does it mean? Why did the aircraft land there? Did it crash land? Did it have another opportunity to land somewhere else? Those are things we need to have a bright line rule that says, hey, if somebody's there, you can't go there. And we have to decide what there means. And we have to decide because a lot of space countries that aren't spacefaring yet are going to say, wait, we can't get there. So how are you going to hold stuff back for us? That's not fair. It's the province of all humankind. So we have to figure out those things. But right now, no, you cannot go up there. I cannot tell you, don't go and tear that plaque off the Apollo 11 limb because you can.
Right. So some commercial company could that right now, of course, Firefly did it. Intuitive Machines they got their spacecraft there. But let's say someone wanted to send a spacecraft there with a rover and send it out and pick something up at the site of the one of the Apollo lunar landings. They could do it. There's nothing
Yeah.
that.
And Bert, it would be very lucrative. You
Yes.
know,
Oh,
um,
yes.
in 2019, that woman sold the first bag with the first carried by the first moonwalker with the first lunar sample for $2.7 million a bag. And then and then she went back to NASA and sued NASA because she said NASA kept some of the microscopic pieces of dust. And sure enough, NASA did. So she got another $900,000 from NASA for these microscopic pieces of dust. I mean, you could fund a lot of space missions with artifacts from Apollo.
Right, right. It's fascinating. I'm glad I think we'll have a couple questions. I want to make sure we can go a little bit longer if it's okay with you because we're past our usual end time, but if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there were an interesting question that I saw that was submitted that there are only a few countries in the world that still have an ability to send uh, payloads and people into space. Should countries that don't have that ability have any say in these agreements? I know about 70 countries have a space program, but not everyone can send anything up. And an interesting question.
Absolutely. Anything that happens in space is going to affect all of us here on Earth, right?
Right,
Remote sensing, so, I can turn the question on its head and say, should countries that have never gone to space be part of an orbital debris cleanup tax or something? Absolutely, because we all benefit from space, right? We are all affected. People say, I don't care if Elon Musk goes to Mars, who cares? But we can't predict what it's going to do to human society to be multiplanetary. It's going to affect us somehow. And I'm not talking about ethereally, I'm talking about economically. There are going to be economic consequences of everything we do in space. And so everybody on Earth, whether they're spacefaring or not, should have um, a say if they want it. I've spent actually a lot of time in South America, and the South Americans are like, no, we don't care. We have so many other things to worry about here. You go do space stuff, and we don't care about the moon. Um, but yeah, everybody ought to have a say.
great, great. I see a question from Wes. The law of the sea and the moon treaties for territory beyond national borders are 0 for 2, taking it too far by saying no property rights unless a supranational body dictates it. What's the best way to point out this flaw going forward with Copious?
Hi, Wes. I think you've been doing a pretty good job of pointing this out to Copeland. It's being said, implicitly. It's implicit in how we are hammering out the Space Resources Working Group and in the ATLAC. There is think about the way, I mean, the international community moves slowly. The United States passed the law that says if you mine it, you own it in 2015. The international community clutched their pearls and said, "Oh my God, they're being imperialist. This is wrong. You can't do that." And now, lo and behold, 10 years later, we have a working group that's like, yeah, we got to figure out how we're going to use these resources. So it's bit by bit, little by little. We just need to keep, you know, presentations like mine, reminding people how important property is to the human psyche, are the way we'll get there.
Very good. Another question from Wes. The concept of ownership is going to evolve along with the concept of property rights. It's not going to be the standard terrestrial model now, is it?
Well, Wes, no, it won't. It's got to be different. I've never been to space, so I can't tell you what space property ought to look like or feel like or be like. I think that we are going to take our terrestrial concepts of property with us initially, but I think when we have lived in space for a little while, I think that will evolve in its own way naturally. And I did want to say, yes, I will see y'all in Orlando, and I am putting together a kick-ass policy day. So make sure you're at ISDC.
Great. Anna asks, as a foreign international lawyers, what companies or startups would you recommend we explore for opportunities?
Astrobotic, sorry, no, not Astrobotic. Astroscale is a really good one. Japanese company with a US presence. I think that iSpace is another good company to look at. I think you have to, as a foreign lawyer, um, you are going to run into export control laws in terms of what you can do and what you're going to have access to. But I think, I mean, of course, Blue Origin and SpaceX also are going to have tremendous opportunities. And I would also think about Aerospace Corp and ULA.
Very good. I see a question from Carl. And I guess this is something that we do a lot of places. Should we first arrange the dictionary of definitions that apply to space? Because you had talked about some things we just don't know yet what they mean.
Carl, you're a man after my own heart. Lawyers love definitions. If you look at a contract, right, the first 40 pages are definitions, and then you have like 2 pages of operative, right? Am I right? Yeah. It would be great to have definitions, and I think that is something, that is the job of our generation. So when I talk about the gaps in the Outer Space Treaty, I love the Outer Space Treaty, but the negotiators gave us a gift. They said, "Look, this is really hard for us. We're going to punt on all of this. We've got the peace part, the no weapons of mass destruction, and now it's our job to sort of figure out what due regard means and set out those parameters. It might be." That we can't have hard and fast definitions yet. I think we do have to be mindful that we have not spent a lot of time in space. And so we have to make sure that we maintain flexibility. Bert, again, you brought up aviation. The aviation safety rules are run by the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. And what they do, they have annexes. So when they have 20 some annexes, and they all have definitions and rules, and they don't go back and change the treaty every time technology improves. They put it in the annex and they say, okay, this is the required standard. And then countries say, oh, I don't have the money to reach that standard yet. And other countries can say, okay, that's all right. We'll still let you fly over, or okay, we don't want you to fly over. But to have that kind of flexibility, that ability to recognize new technology, making things better, making things safer, I would say don't approach within 2 miles of an Apollo lunar landing site, but maybe 15 years from now, we can get closer. And then at some point, I'm hoping, my great grandchildren can go up and be like within 2 feet of it.
I see a question from Kurt. NASA has not relinquished ownership of the Apollo hardware on the moon, has it? Wouldn't that provide legal basis to discourage private salvage?
So, Kurt, yeah, actually, NASA has ceded it all to the Smithsonian.
Oh,
Yeah, so all of those, and you're right to point out that the law states under Article 8 of the Outer Space Treaty that if you launch an object into space, you retain jurisdiction and control over that object. So yes, on a legal basis, if somebody were to go to the LEM in Tranquility Base and tear off the plaque, that is a that is violating the ownership of the United States. Great, but that's,
What can you do about
yeah.
it? Right. Uh, Let me get a few final questions in because we got a number about space law careers. Uh, for the beginner interested in space law and policy, any suggestions on resources or books that they might take up?
So if you go to our website, the Center for Air and Space Law, we have our journal is free and available to everybody, the Journal of Space Law. And I would suggest that you go and you actually start at the beginning because it's the very beginning. We were the very first school to have a journal, and our journal dates back to 1971. So these are people writing about the space treaties as they were being negotiated. So it's really fascinating to see the growth of that. But you can go, you can search, you can look at all of the table of contents and just start picking and choosing articles that look interesting to you.
I see a question from Tiffany about for those transitioning in careers, how might one strengthen their application for the program at Ole Miss?
So our admissions committee, I scratch my head. It's a very holistic process. I think what they're looking for is a commitment. This is not that this is something that you really want to do, and it's not just sort of a, oh yeah, I'll throw my hat in the ring. What we want are we want to produce the best lawyers, the best space lawyers in the world, and that requires a commitment and a passion for space.
I saw you also had a certificate program that looked pretty interesting.
Absolutely. You don't have to, you can earn a graduate certificate in air and space law. It's 4 classes, and you can also do that online and asynchronously if necessary. So
That
it's a
sounds,
great, it's a lot of fun.
yeah, that sounds
And
interesting.
you get to spend time with me.
Oh, there you go. Let's take one more question from the chat from Sarah here, because we didn't really discuss space debris. How can a global initiative for space debris mitigation be established, considering current ownership rights in space?
So this is a tough one. We actually have under the UN COPUOS debris mitigation guidelines. They're not very, they were negotiated in the 90s, and so they're not that strict. I think there's a 25-year end of life. And through the COPUOS, this is something that the COPUOS has actually really spent a lot of time on, and we have the long-term sustainability of space activities, which has sort of standards like this is how you should be doing it. You're right. It is very difficult to incentivize people to clean up after themselves when there's no rule that requires it. And so this is something where we're just going to have to bite the bullet and decide that we're going to spend the money. And we're getting more and more research out there that shows if we don't do something, if we don't clean up now, we're going to bar ourselves from our orbit. So hopefully, what we need the political will, which means we need to educate the public and we need to get the public to get mad and we need the public to go to Congress and say, clean up our orbit, spend our tax dollars doing that.
A couple questions about for all Moonkind, and we'll close out. What kind of preservation model do you think is best for the lunar sites?
Oh, I'm just a lawyer. I I'm, I'm just gonna put the will in place to get those preserved. No, it's a great question. We are putting together a working group to start really thinking about that. I have had some great ideas. I didn't see Madhu on the line today, but Madhu's had a class where they've talked about creating sort of cable cars to be able to go over at the sites. People have thought about, what would it look like to put a dome over the site and things like that. So right now, we just want to get them recognized, and then smarter people smarter than me can figure out how to actually preserve and protect.
And another question, how can people support your efforts? Can people join for all Moonkind?
So we're actually going through a reorganization. I encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn, and then we are going to start having a lot of volunteer opportunities and a membership opportunity as well. But it was supposed to be January 2025, and then it was supposed to be Chinese New Year. But I'll get it out there. So please just follow us or follow me on LinkedIn, and we'll keep everybody posted.
Very good. One last question, more philosophical. How can we ensure the ethical treatment of space settlers, especially if commercial enterprises are responsible for their welfare? It's a challenge on Earth, too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when we think about all of the horrific things that happen here on Earth, um, the best way is going to be to mandate and require open lines of communication. The best way to harm people is to cut them off from everybody else. And so what we would like to do, what I'd like to see, and this is some of the research that I do at Ole Miss, is um, while we don't have a lot of commercial industry yet, let's get them all to agree to certain basic rights for humans and build them into contracts, right? Blue Origin's not going to object to that. Intuitive Machines isn't going to object to that. SpaceX isn't going to object to that. And then we will already have sort of basic tenets of human rights built into those contracts. But fundamentally, it's got to be you must be um, able to communicate with people on Earth at your own will.
Very good. On that note, I just want to again thank you, Michelle. That was really fascinating. I think we could talk for a while. There's so many great questions. I apologize if we didn't get to your question. What we'll be doing is we'll be saving the chat. And if it's okay with you, Michelle, I'll try to send you any questions that maybe were not answered. But we thank you so much. It was very enjoyable. Maybe we can get you back again.
I would love to, Bert. You know that anytime.
Great, great. So thank you. I do see Larry has his hand up, so I'll let Larry ask a question. Larry?
I just want to Michelle pointed out something. Uh, in my ancient past, I used to be a practitioner for government agencies. I was what they call a Class B practitioner for the law. And the thing is, I thought that was my future until Ronald Reagan decided to deregulate the whole transportation industry. And all of a sudden, I got motion to death.
You got motion.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. We don't want that happening in space.
Nope, nope. So again, thank you so much, Michelle. And I want to learn more about that certificate program. That sounds interesting.
Absolutely. Great.
Uh,
Thanks a lot, Bert. Really
Thank
appreciate the
you.
invitation.
Oh, my pleasure. And I want to thank my colleagues, Stephanie, Sadia, and Fred and Larry. So I want to share my screen, everybody, one last time. And as we close out for the night, let's get here. There we go. A great program. So I just want to remind everybody that the next program is the next session is our town hall. That's going to be 2 weeks from tonight on the ISDC. And we'll hope to have a lot more about our schedule through April and May after that. So again, thank you all for joining us. For those of you in today's time zones, have a great evening. For those of you in tomorrow's time zone, have a great day. And everybody have a great weekend. We'll see you in 2 weeks.